Welcome back to the show. Today we have Jeetu Patel. He's the Chief Product Officer and Chief Strategy Officer at Box. Jeetu, welcome back to the show.
Evan, thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you back on the show. We had a really good chat when you did the radio version a couple of months ago, and I thought, I want to do a bit of a deeper dive on a couple of things with you, and so I thought I should have you on this version. But maybe before we get into that, let's get to know you a little bit better and start off with where you grew up.
Yeah, I grew up in India,
Okay.
in what they call Mumbai now. In my time, they used to call it Bombay, so I still struggle with which one to call it. But so I grew up in India and
Very cool.
moved here in '91
Okay.
to Chicago, and then I ran my own business over there for about 17 years,
Wow.
in the strategy consulting space, and then I wanted to learn about scale and I always wanted to be in software. And I used to do a lot of work with software companies and consulting with them. And so I joined as CTO at EMC for their software business. And then from there, we very quickly found out that the reason they brought me in was to put together the cloud mobile strategy at the time. This was back in 2010,
Sure.
and what they realized, what we all realized collectively was, hey, it's going to be much easier to go out and make an acquisition because the legacy technologies had reached their they'd asymptoted as far as what you could do with them. And so we made an acquisition of a company called Simplicity, which was a competitor to Box,
Okay.
oddly enough. And then we scaled that business. But then when Dell was buying EMC, they wanted to make sure that some of those assets were not really that core to the business. So they wanted to kind of spin them off. So we sold that to private equity. And
Okay.
then at the same time, Aaron and I were good friends, and we were talking during the whole time. And he said, "Hey, why don't you come over here? And we need to incubate our second act of, we were a single product company at the time. We had just gone public, and a couple $100 million in revenues. And he said we need to have a second act of making sure that we have multiple products in the market. And so I created a business unit for what we call our platform business, which was our APIs. And that luckily now is one of our fastest growing businesses. That's how I joined Box. And so that was the whole journey in a nutshell.
Very cool. So for people that haven't heard of Box, what exactly do you guys do? Because you guys do a lot of stuff.
We do have a pretty broad portfolio in a very specific domain. So we
Okay.
help organizations more effectively work with, collaborate, and secure their content.
Okay.
And so we are, kind of cloud content management company is the category that we're creating. And if you think about everything as simple as you want to access your file from a mobile device to now you want to share it with someone in your team to now you want to share it with someone who's a customer to now you want to make sure that you engage that content in a workflow. You want to make sure that you have some security and data protection on that content and privacy enforced on it. And then you want to make sure that you have some kind of really sophisticated machine learning that can be applied to that content. All of those pieces we do with our core platform in a single platform. So what you typically find is with most of our competitors, they might have 5 or 7 different products that you have to go out and put your content into, and that creates a lot of fractioning and duplication. Whereas with us, it's a single platform that you can have for helping organizations manage their what we call digital workplace, so that they can have their employees have a better set of tools to more effectively collaborate with one another, and also help businesses to be overall operating as digital businesses while
Very cool.
securing the content in the cloud. So as you move your content to the cloud, we tend to be the one that people tend to choose in large enterprises.
Got
We have
you.
about 90,000 customers, about 65
Wow.
million users, give or take. About 69% of the Fortune 500,
Wow.
40% of the Global 2000. So we are actually at pretty high scale now, and we've almost tripled our revenue in the past. The time I've been here, so we're a little over. We'll be a little over 600 million as a guidance at the end of this year. Our fiscal year ends in January. So.
Got you. Very cool. Okay. So you guys recently launched Box Skills. What exactly is it and how does it work?
Yeah, Box Skills. So one of the things that we have spent a lot of time thinking about is what can you do in a product that's truly discontinuous for the market, where you don't just go build something that's already been there but in the cloud, but do something that meaningfully kind of changes the game. And one of the things we found is in this space of content management, there's this one property which is a very counterintuitive property and actually not that great, which is the more you use these systems, the harder they get to use. Because the more content goes into those systems, and then it's harder to find them, and so on and so forth. So the way that the industry is typically handled that is they have this thing called metadata, which is intelligence that's about a piece of content that you add into the system. The challenge with metadata is it's not just that, it's that someone has to enter that data in. So if you want to have, for a contract, what the account name is and what the contract value is and what the, what the expiration date of the contract is, all of those pieces, you have to typically enter those things in.
Right.
And that's where the challenge comes in, because most of the times that requires human capital to enter it in. There's errors and accuracies. So your intelligence is only as good as what you feed into the system manually. And that's where you've actually seen some challenges in this market. What Skills does, it says, well, there's billions of dollars being spent on machine learning, where these machine learning algorithms have now gotten sophisticated enough where they can look at a piece of content and extract very meaningful insights out of the content. So if I'm looking at an image, I should be able to detect the objects within the image. If I'm looking at a video, I can actually transcribe the audio in the video, and I can make sure that I do facial recognition. So if Jeetu and Kevin are on this TV show, it'll know exactly when the camera pans on Kevin, when the camera pans on me, and when are we talking about the topic of machine learning, and then take you right to that spot. Right. You can do the same thing with audio files, or you can do things with text files where you collect information. So what we wanted to do was meaningfully change the game and use these AI innovations that are happening in the market, machine learning innovations, to apply those to content in Box. Gotcha. And so we built this product called Skills, where we basically got a framework where third-party developers of machine learning tools can attach their machine learning algorithms to Box, so that you can now bring your machine learning algorithm to the content in Box. And that creates a whole different vector of opportunity for customers who are like, you don't have to, you might have, one vendor that's really good at image recognition, another one that's good at video, another one that's good at documents, and you can bring all of those together and compound the value of content that happens to be in Box. So that's what we're trying to do with Skills, and we've actually had a tremendous amount of response in what we've seen in the early days of it being launched.
Very cool. So can I use Skills on all the content that I've had in Box for years, or is it all the new stuff? Is it both, or how does that kind of work?
Yeah, so you can basically, the way that we start is you can actually start by, if the way that people use Box is there's petabytes and petabytes of content sometimes that might be in there. So, and at least hundreds of terabytes with large organizations. So you might not always want to go out and get everything historically, processed through Skills. That might be an expensive endeavor. So what most customers do is they say, hey, I'm going to start from this point forward, and any new content that's coming in, let me actually put it through Skills. And what that does is actually gets your most recent content in there. But over time, most organizations want to have most of the content that gets in some way, processed through a Skills engine. It depends on the class of content. You might have a different skill that you might apply to different classes of content. So if I have images, I might apply a certain skill. But if I have text documents or contracts or leases or whatever your kind of class of document is, you might have very specialist skills that you might apply to it. Okay. So the partner strategy is super important here, because one of the things that we are very differentiated in is we want to be the Switzerland of the content management market, where we're the system of record, and then we will have a great first party set of experiences that we provide, but then we'll tie in with kind of third party providers so that we can make sure that we can add value to our content on a continuous basis and compound it.
Sure. No, that makes a lot of sense. And some of that old content, you probably just want it for archival purposes, and some of it's outdated, and then some of it you might want to actually maybe run through some Skills. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So, you want to provide customers enough knobs and dials so that they can do that effectively.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So how did you guys come up with the idea for this? Because I'm sure tons of people out there listening know how challenging it can be to find an image from a decade ago, or even brand new audio files. And you're like, I know we talked about that, but I can't remember if it was 10 minutes into the conversation, 45 minutes into a 2-hour meeting or something. So how does it kind of work?
Yeah, so maybe I'll talk about the innovation process at Box a little bit as we go through this, because the way what we get very obsessed about is picking the right problem to solve that can have a disproportionate amount of value that can be delivered to customers.
Okay.
So, and that we think is 90% of building a great product is you have to pick the right problems to solve.
Okay.
And so most of the great ideas that come about as at the intersection of there's someone working on this on something, and they observe a problem that the customer has. There are some customers that are very vocal about articulating those problems for which they don't have a solution. And then, a few good minds kind of come to it and they start thinking about what might be the right way to go solve it. And skills was one of those kind of manifestations.
Gotcha.
Most people think that, it's one moment and one epiphany that happens with one person. And that's typically not how innovation works. It's a very, very kind of organic process. And once there's a germ of an idea, what then happens is that then gets socialized with a bunch of people, and we have these strategy meetings every Friday where different product teams sit with us and we actually brainstorm on what we need to do, and then there are different stages of that. Once you get to something that seems like it's really compelling, you start validating that with customers, and then before you know it, if you see the momentum, then you start investing in that and building the product out.
Interesting. No, I think I love the idea, because like I mentioned with the audio example, there's been tons of times you search for stuff and you can sometimes you have to listen to the whole thing or spend hours trying to find something. So I think it makes a lot of sense what you guys are doing with skills.
Yeah.
But I'm curious though, to talk about some of the automation and workflow stuff that you guys do, either with the Box platform or with skills or anything else you guys do in the space, because it's really quite fascinating to me.
Yeah, I think if you think about all of these things that we're talking about, they actually fit within an overarching strategy, which is we want to be the platform for your content needs within an organization. And so, as content moves to the cloud, you can do things with that content that you just simply couldn't do in an on-premise scenario. So for example, if you had an on-premise legacy system in place, there was just no way that you could have done what we talked about in skills, where you get multiple kind of algorithms for machine learning that can be applied to your content, and you can just plug them in, and before you know it, you've got this very intelligent set of metadata. And now with the metadata, you can do some very cool things. Sure. That's just something that you couldn't have done in the legacy architecture that you have now the luxury to do in a cloud architecture. So the way that we've thought about this is we want to make sure that we can be the platform for content that really helps organizations think about operating their entire business in a digital manner.
Okay.
Which means, how do they manage their relationships and how do they make their employees and workforce productive?
Okay.
How do they make their customers productive? How do they make their suppliers, partners more engaged with the way that they work? So the entire value chain and the ecosystem has to work together. And so the capabilities over there go from what do we need to do to make sure that we can have access to content, to collaboration on the content, to now I'm going to make sure that the content can have intelligence around it. And then at some point in time, most people want to go out and make sure that that gets embedded into mission critical business workflows. And what we found with workflows is there's probably about 80 to 90% of the processes that happen in a business today have not been automated, because the automation systems that have been in place have only been for the extremely high-end kind of processes that are very repetitive and high-scale volume transaction-based processes. I've got a massive loan processing application. I'm going to process a bunch of loans, and that's what those workflow systems are used for. And now what you're seeing is there's a ton of these other kind of use cases, which you and I work on every day, that just don't get automated. I might have a deal desk approval that needs to be done, or I might have a digital asset management system where I need to go out and find exactly what the right images for a campaign, or there's a bunch of these kind of different classes of workflows that just historically have never been automated, and so they just happen manually. And what we want to do is really help make sure that we bring a solution for that problem in a way that everyone can, we want to democratize workflow in some way so that everyone can go out and use this ability to automate, their business in a very lightweight way, but yet a very potent way. And so what we've done with automations is we're building this capability basically an if then else kind of, if you've heard of IFTTT, think of it that way, where it's like, if there's a certain action that happens, or there's a certain event that happens in Box, there's a certain action that needs to be, that needs to happen. So for example, someone uploaded a file into a folder, make sure that you create a task for someone. Someone approved the task, make sure that you update the metadata. Once the metadata gets uploaded, make sure you have a trigger to a third-party system so that there's a workflow that gets triggered over there. All of those are kind of things that you can automate a business with in a pretty lightweight way while you're in the Box experience, and from the Box experience also tie into the partner ecosystem over time. So that's what we're building out. And so this all ties together. So metadata is a very core part of how automations happens. And automations, when they happen, you can also start automating a lot of security and compliance workflows. And so it just continues to keep compounding and adding value to a customer in a very kind of easy to use way where no one needs to really get trained on it.
Yeah, interesting. That was going to be my next question to you, is how do you make sure all this stuff is secure, right? Because at the end of the day, in a lot of people's eyes, that might almost be the most important thing and can actually slow down companies from moving to the cloud. So how do you guys handle the security around all this stuff?
Yeah, so the way that we think about the core value that our platform provides, it's in a couple of different vectors, right? So one of the vectors, if you think about who are the buyers of our technologies, typically, either line of business professionals or the CIO or the CISO, the Chief Information Security Officer. And there's a few things that they care about. The first thing they care about is, I want to make sure that my employee experience is pretty solid.
Sure.
Number two, I want to make sure that I can operate within my budget and cut some cost out of my operation, because IT budgets aren't growing as fast as revenues are growing in companies. And number three, I want to make sure that I can secure my information and make sure that I'm compliant with rules and regulations if I'm in a regulatory environment. And so those are the things that we do now. On the security side, what we've done is we've got this, we've always had these very deep partnerships with third parties, and we've also built a lot of security capabilities for making sure that you can have administrative controls. And what we're now doing is taking that to the next level, where we have this product that we announced earlier called Box Shield. Okay. And what that allows you to do is use machine learning to detect anomalies within systems. Okay. And then be able to say, based on those anomalies, we want to make sure that there's a level of visibility on what's occurring. So, for example, I'm going to be I'm from the sales organization, and then all of a sudden, oddly enough, one Thursday evening, I start downloading all the product specs within the company. Okay. It just seems like it's a little off, because it's not normally what I would end up doing. And maybe we flag that. And then I find out that, this person is actually last day is Friday. That just seems like an awkward kind of thing to do. Maybe there's some intellectual property theft that's going on. Or, I happen to be in New York City, and I opened up a document, and then literally 2 hours later, my account, Jeetu's account, is accessing the same document from Iran. And that seems like an impossible travel scenario. And so maybe there's something wrong over there. And so those are anomalies that we want to make sure that we start to detect. And then what we're also doing is applying a lot of precision-based controls around it. So what do you do for making sure that people don't, download, the wrong kinds of documents? And so having precision-based controls that say classify the document and make sure that you can have some kind of control, so you don't just, if it's a top secret document, don't allow for it to be downloaded, just have it be viewed with a watermark in the Box viewer, those kind of things. We're trying to do, one of the reasons that customers come to us is they find it so easy to collaborate in Box, but the second reason they come to us is they want to make sure that the content is very secure. And what they're finding is your content is more secure when it's in the cloud, in Box, because what you're doing is not only are you securing your content that's in Box, but every application that integrates with Box, when Box becomes a system of record, gets more secure as a function of integrating with Box, because now your content can stay in a single source of truth, and you can just tie into every other third-party application.
Yeah, because if I set up a server at my company, I need to constantly be on top of the security. Never mind all the other stuff I need to do around that, right? And so I need to make sure it's up to date. I need to make sure it's secure. I need to make sure it doesn't run out of storage. and a plethora of other issues, right?
Yeah.
And so it makes a lot of sense, especially for global or with organizations with even one office with people traveling or working remote from home or whatnot, being able to access their content like they're in their physical office, right? And then as you get bigger and you expand outside of your geographical regions, you need to be in the cloud. It sounds like you guys have pretty much
I
found
think
that.
it used to be that, people didn't move to the cloud. And if you look back like 5 or 7 years ago, people didn't move to the cloud because they didn't feel like the cloud was secure.
Right.
What we're now starting to see is people are moving to the cloud because they believe that the security posture in the cloud is actually safer than that of it being on-prem, because the economics just make that true. Because if you think about it, this is our sole business, to secure the content, collaborate with it, manage it. And so we are spending a ton of resources and capital on making sure that we can make our system secure. Whereas a company whose business is not security, but whose business is doing something else, they do this as like they can't go out and spend that level of kind of effort around it. So what you're starting to see is there's a tremendous amount of leverage that can be had if you use specialists whose core business it is to do what they do, and use them rather than you trying to do something when it's not your core business. You should focus on your core and let the people that are doing those services as their core focus on that piece of it. And that's where kind of, what you've seen is this market flip where what used to be in this market a liability has now become its biggest strength, which is like the reason people are moving content to the cloud is because it's really secure and it can actually be governed and can be managed in the right way and have the right level of instrumentation. And, you can do tracking and audit trails behind it that you just couldn't do otherwise.
Yeah, actually, you bring up something really quite interesting, is the audit trail, right? And knowing who's been accessing what and when, for how long, that kind of thing. So do you maybe want to just talk about that quickly about the audit trail?
The audit trail is actually a really interesting point because it's not just for the purpose of security. There might be auditing for the purposes of compliance or even for productivity. So for example, I happen to be someone that sent a document to a few people within my organization that I wanted them to read for our kickoff meeting. And I have some level of audit trail and some level of access stats that tells me on who's received the document, who's read it. I can actually just go and pull up the document and see exactly what's happened. I can also see if there's a workflow that's being done on exactly what step, who's gone out and completed the workflow and who has not completed the workflow. I can also make sure that I have auditing around compliance. Are we going out and adhering to a certain level of retention and disposition policies or legal holds? I could do the same thing with security. So like in every single domain where we have capabilities, the audit trail really helps not just enhance the security of the document or the content, but also the overall compliance of it and the productivity that people go out and derive from content as well. So it's a very, very strategic capability that we start to see, especially as you start automating your business processes within your organization.
Totally. Yeah. But Jeetu, we're kind of coming to the end of the show. So let's close with mentioning where people can get more information about you guys and all the stuff we talked about today.
Yeah, so Box.com. If you don't have an account, you can actually download Box for free from there. We also you can access me on Patel41 at Twitter, as well as you can read our blogs at Box.com as well. So I think those are different ways that you can keep up to date with what all the innovation is that's going on, and we'd love to make sure that we have. You join our community of users and our community of customers who can give us feedback on how we make this service better and better for, over time.
Very cool. Well, again, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to be on the show, and I look forward to keeping in touch with you, and have a good rest of your day, man.
Thank you for having me, Kevin. Take care.
Bye.
Cheers.